I never believed that destiny announced itself in grand gestures or dramatic moments, because my life had always been composed of quiet routines, small responsibilities, and the kind of ordinary hopes that rarely reach beyond the horizon of survival. My name is Leila, and before everything changed, I lived in a modest coastal town where the air smelled of salt and dust, where people worked hard not to chase dreams but simply to protect stability, and where I had learned early that imagination was a luxury best enjoyed privately. I worked at a small travel agency, organizing itineraries for people who could afford adventures I could only picture through brochures and glossy images of places glowing beneath foreign suns. I did not expect to become part of one of those stories. Yet life, I would later discover, does not require expectation in order to transform you completely. The day I met him began like any other, filled with routine calls and scheduling frustrations, until the office door opened and silence followed. Not because of authority or intimidation, but because his presence carried a calm gravity that drew attention without demanding it. He entered with quiet confidence, dressed in tailored simplicity rather than display, his posture relaxed yet unmistakably dignified, and when his eyes met mine there was curiosity rather than distance. He introduced himself as Amir. Nothing more, no titles, no declarations. Only later did I learn that he was Sheikh Amir al-Rahman, a man whose name carried influence across regions I had only read about, whose responsibilities extended far beyond anything I could comprehend. But in that moment, he was simply a traveler requesting assistance, planning a cultural visit through areas he wished to explore quietly and without ceremony. And I was simply the woman tasked with helping him. As we discussed routes, traditions, and logistics, I noticed something unusual. He listened, not politely, not performatively, genuinely. He asked about my recommendations, my opinions, even my experiences, as though my perspective held value beyond professional courtesy. Few people with power did that. Fewer still did it with sincerity. When he left, thanking me with warmth rather than formality, I assumed the encounter would fade into memory like countless others. But 2 days later, he returned, and this time he asked if I would personally guide certain arrangements during his stay. I hesitated, not out of fear, but disbelief, because opportunities like that did not arrive in my world. Yet something in his calm reassurance made me accept. And with that simple decision, my life stepped onto a path I could never have predicted. Traveling alongside him revealed a man far more layered than public perception might imagine. Someone who balanced leadership with introspection, tradition with curiosity, and responsibility with a quiet longing for moments of normal human connection. We spoke often during long drives across sunlit landscapes, about culture, family, dreams left unexplored. He told me about expectations placed upon him since youth, about carrying legacy, protecting heritage, and making decisions that shaped communities. I shared simpler truths, about growing up modestly, about valuing kindness over status, and about believing that dignity belonged to everyone regardless of circumstance. Those conversations created something subtle, unplanned. An understanding that crossed social distance without erasing it. And slowly, I felt something awaken within me. Admiration at first, then emotional closeness I struggled to define. Because falling for someone from another world is not like ordinary affection. It arrives with wonder and with fear. One evening, standing beneath a sky painted in amber and violet desert light, he spoke softly. "You see me as a person," he said, "not as a position." I smiled faintly. "Because that's what you are." He studied me thoughtfully, and in his gaze I sensed recognition. Not romantic declaration, not yet, but the beginning of emotional significance. A connection forming between difference and similarity, between distance and closeness, between two lives that should never have intersected, yet somehow had. And as I watched the horizon fade into twilight, I realized something quietly powerful. This journey was no longer just professional, it was personal, and whatever lay ahead would change me forever. The days that followed unfolded with a rhythm unlike anything I had known before, not hurried, not ordinary, but measured by shared experiences and conversations that seemed to deepen with every mile we traveled together. I remained aware of the invisible boundary between our worlds. He carried heritage, influence, and expectations shaped by centuries of tradition. I carried simplicity, independence, and a life built on modest resilience. And yet, somewhere between desert roads and coastal evenings, those differences began to feel less like distance and more like contrast. Two perspectives learning from one another. One afternoon, we visited a historic marketplace alive with color, fragrance, and human warmth, where laughter blended with the bargaining of vendors and sunlight spilled through woven canopies overhead. I expected Amir to move through the crowd with detachment. Instead, he walked beside me with relaxed curiosity, pausing to greet shopkeepers, asking questions about craftsmanship, listening to stories from strangers as though each interaction mattered. Leadership, he told me quietly, is meaningless if it separates you from people. His words stayed with me, because in that moment I understood something deeper about him, that his strength did not come from status alone, but from awareness, and that awareness drew me closer emotionally than I intended. It was during an evening drive through the desert that my feelings first unsettled me. The sky stretched endlessly above us, scattered with stars brighter than any I had seen near the coast, and silence filled the car in a peaceful way, not demanding conversation. He spoke suddenly. "Tell me something you've never told anyone." I laughed softly, surprised. "That's a dangerous request." He smiled. "Only if honesty frightens you." I hesitated, then answered truthfully. "I've always wanted to see the world, not through brochures or plans, but through my own footsteps. Yet I convinced myself that dreaming beyond my circumstances was unrealistic." He considered this, then said quietly, "Dreams are not measured by origin, only by courage." Those words touched something fragile inside me, a place where hope and doubt had long coexisted. And in the silence that followed, I became aware of how deeply his presence affected me. Not because of wealth, not because of reputation, but because he saw possibility in me where I had seen limits. Our connection shifted gradually, like light changing tone before sunset, subtle yet undeniable. Longer conversations, more laughter, moments where our eyes met and lingered just enough to reveal awareness neither of us addressed aloud. Still, I guarded my heart, because reality remained clear. Men like him lived within worlds governed by responsibility, family expectations, and cultural structures, far more complex than romance. Women like me did not simply step into those realities, and yet, emotion rarely asks permission from logic. One evening, standing on a terrace overlooking lantern-lit courtyards, Amir spoke with unusual vulnerability. "My life has always been defined by duty," he admitted. "Choices often made for the benefit of many rather than myself." I listened quietly. He continued, "But recently, I find myself wondering what it would mean to choose something purely because it matters to my heart." His gaze met mine, steady, searching, and in that moment I felt both warmth and uncertainty rise within me, because I understood what remained unspoken between us. Something growing, something beautiful, something complicated. That night, I lay awake longer than usual, replaying conversations and emotions, realizing that admiration had evolved into affection, and affection into something deeper, more personal, more vulnerable. Falling for him felt both inevitable and impossible, like reaching toward a horizon you know you may never touch, yet unable to turn away from its beauty. And as sleep finally claimed me, one thought remained clear. This journey was no longer about where we traveled, it was about what we were becoming to one another, and the realization that neither of us could pretend not to feel it. I began to notice how easily comfort can turn into attachment when two people share enough moments of honesty, because somewhere between quiet conversations and shared landscapes, my awareness of Amir shifted from appreciation to emotional reliance. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't arrive like a storm. It grew quietly, like warmth spreading through cold hands, until I realized his presence had become something I anticipated rather than merely accepted. And that realization frightened me, because affection toward someone whose life belonged to an entirely different reality carried risks I could neither measure nor control. The shift became undeniable during a formal gathering I attended at his invitation. An evening filled with dignitaries, elegance, and expectations I felt unprepared to navigate. I wore borrowed confidence as carefully as I wore the dress I had spent too long choosing, aware of curious glances and polite smiles as I stepped into a world defined by refinement and hierarchy. Amir remained beside me throughout the evening, attentive, reassuring, subtly guiding me through conversations with kindness that never felt patronizing. "You belong here as much as anyone," he whispered, when he sensed my uncertainty. I shook my head gently. "I belong where I understand the rules." He smiled softly. "Rules are often rewritten by courage." His words steadied me, yet they also intensified my awareness of how deeply I valued his presence, not as protection but as partnership. And that awareness made distance feel impossible. Later that night, beneath soft courtyard lighting and drifting music, we found ourselves alone for the first time without obligations or schedules dictating the moment. Silence surrounded us, comfortable, yet charged with meaning. "I worry," I confessed quietly, "that I'm forgetting how different our lives truly are." He looked at me thoughtfully. "Difference is not always division." "But reality can be," I replied. The honesty lingered between us. He stepped closer, not invading space, but narrowing distance enough to make emotion tangible. "Leila," he said gently, "connection is not determined by expectation, but by truth." My heart moved before my thoughts could restrain it. And in that suspended moment, beneath lantern light and open sky, I allowed myself to acknowledge what had been growing for weeks. I cared for him deeply, not as fascination, not as fantasy, but as a person whose presence had become essential to my emotional world. Yet love does not exist without complexity. Days later, I overheard a conversation between advisors discussing potential alliances, traditions, and expectations tied to Amir's future. References to responsibilities that included strategic marriage considerations far beyond personal affection. I did not interrupt, I did not confront, but something within me shifted. Because reality had spoken clearly, his life would always involve obligations I could not compete with, and suddenly my heart felt both full and fragile. That evening, as we walked along the quiet shoreline, he sensed my distance. "You're quieter today," he observed. I forced a small smile, just thinking. He waited, patient, encouraging honesty. So I spoke. "I don't want to become something temporary in your life, something beautiful but impossible." He stopped walking. His voice softened. "You are not temporary." Emotion trembled beneath his composure, but neither of us should pretend this path will be simple. For the first time, uncertainty shadowed his confidence, and strangely, that vulnerability made him feel closer to me than ever before. That night, as waves whispered against dark sand, we stood between hope and realism. Two people connected by genuine feeling, yet surrounded by circumstances neither could ignore. And I realized something important. Love is not only defined by emotion, it is shaped by courage. The courage to face obstacles, to ask difficult questions, and to decide whether connection is worth the challenges it demands. As I returned to my room, I knew one truth had crystallized within me. My heart had already crossed a threshold from which retreat would not be easy. And whatever lay ahead, it would test both of us in ways we had not yet imagined. There are moments in life when emotions can no longer hide behind courtesy or quiet understanding, when truth insists on being spoken aloud, and I felt that inevitability approaching with a certainty that both excited and unsettled me. The distance that had grown between Amir and me after my discovery of his obligations did not stem from anger or resentment. It came from reflection, from the awareness that affection alone could not dissolve centuries of expectation or reshape structures built long before either of us existed. Yet silence between two people who care deeply becomes heavier with every unspoken word, and eventually it must be lifted. One evening, as warm wind moved gently across the terrace where we often talked, I gathered the courage to confront what weighed on my heart. "I heard about the expectations surrounding your future," I said quietly. He did not pretend confusion, he simply nodded. "There are responsibilities I cannot ignore." The calm honesty in his voice hurt more than denial would have. I met his eyes. And where do I exist within that reality? The question lingered between us, fragile, sincere, unavoidable. Amir exhaled slowly, as though choosing words required care beyond diplomacy. "You exist where my heart recognizes you," he answered softly. "But my life is not shaped by emotion alone. Pain and warmth intertwined within me." Because his answer carried truth rather than comfort, and truth, I had learned, demands strength to accept. Days passed as we navigated this new awareness, neither withdrawing completely, yet neither pretending simplicity remained. Our conversations deepened, more introspective, more vulnerable. We spoke of culture, of tradition, of identity, not as barriers, but as forces that shaped our understanding of love itself. He shared the weight of leadership, the importance of honoring lineage, and the pressure of decisions that extended far beyond personal happiness. I shared my belief that love should empower rather than restrict, and that authenticity mattered more than appearances. And somewhere within those dialogues, we began seeking not escape from reality, but understanding within it. The emotional turning point arrived unexpectedly during a quiet desert excursion arranged as a farewell to the journey we had begun together. The horizon stretched endlessly in golden stillness, the world reduced to wind and sand, and beneath that vast openness we finally allowed emotion to speak without restraint. "I never planned to feel this way," he admitted. "Neither did I whispered. He stepped closer, sincerity unguarded. "You have changed how I see possibility." My voice trembled slightly. "And you have shown me how courage can exist alongside uncertainty." For a long moment we stood there, not divided by status or expectation, but united by genuine affection that neither logic nor distance could erase. And when he gently took my hand, the gesture carried meaning beyond romance. It was acknowledgement, respect, connection. Love's beauty does not eliminate its complexity, because with that connection came decision, whether to pursue something challenging or retreat toward safety. That night I reflected alone, recognizing that loving someone meant accepting both their light and their limitations, just as they must accept mine. And I understood something profound. This story would not be defined by fantasy endings or dramatic sacrifice. It would be shaped by courage, by our willingness to face reality while honoring emotion. As I watched the sunrise paint the desert in soft gold the following morning, I realized my life had already changed beyond recognition. Regardless of outcome, regardless of distance, I had discovered love capable of expanding my world, strengthening my voice, and revealing depths of myself I had never explored. And whatever the next chapter held, I was ready to face it, with hope, with strength, and with a heart unafraid to feel. There is something quietly powerful about the moment you realize your life has divided itself into two distinct chapters: the person you were before you loved, and the person you became because you did. And as I prepared to return home, I felt that transformation settling within me with both gratitude and uncertainty. Packing my belongings felt surreal, as though I were folding away not just clothes and souvenirs, but fragments of experience that had reshaped my understanding of myself, of courage, and of connection. Amir and I had not avoided the truth. We had faced it together, and facing it had strengthened rather than diminished what existed between us. Still, departure carries its own emotional weight, because love tested by distance must either deepen or fade, and neither outcome can be predicted. On my final evening, we met once more beneath the same terrace lights where so many of our conversations had unfolded, the air warm and calm, the sky stretching endlessly above us like an unwritten promise. "I never wanted this to feel like an ending," he said quietly. I smiled gently. "It doesn't." He studied me with familiar attentiveness. "You've changed me, Leila. You reminded me that leadership without emotional truth is incomplete." Emotion rose in my chest, and you've shown me that dreams deserve courage, even when the path forward isn't clear. Silence followed, not empty, but full of everything words could not fully express. Then he spoke again. "My world will always carry responsibilities, but it also carries choice. I cannot promise simplicity, yet I want you to remain part of my life." His honesty felt grounding rather than overwhelming, because love built on reality stands stronger than love built on illusion. I nodded softly. "I don't need certainty," I said, "only sincerity." And in that moment, we embraced, not dramatically, not desperately, but with warmth and respect, acknowledging connection without claiming ownership. It was not an ending, it was a beginning shaped by trust. Months passed after I returned home, and life resumed its quieter rhythm. Yet I was no longer the same woman who once believed her world was confined to brochures and imagination. I pursued opportunities, traveled, learned, grew, and throughout it all, Amir and I remained connected through conversations, visits, and shared understanding that our bond transcended geography. Love, I discovered, does not always require constant proximity. Sometimes it exists as partnership, evolving, adapting, strengthening through time. Years later, standing once again beneath a desert sky during a visit that felt both familiar and new, I realized how profoundly my journey had shaped me. I had not been rescued. I had not been transformed by status. Instead, I had discovered my own strength, my own worth, and met someone who valued it. Amir joined me quietly, his presence still carrying that calm gravity I remembered. "Do you regret any of it?" he asked softly. I looked toward the horizon glowing in twilight. "No," I said, "because loving you never confined me, it expanded me." He smiled, the same thoughtful warmth that had first drawn my curiosity. And as we stood there together, I understood something with absolute clarity. Love is not measured by fairy tale endings or perfect resolutions. It is measured by growth, by respect, by the courage to connect across difference and uncertainty. Our story had not been about escaping reality. It had been about embracing it, with open hearts and steady resolve. And somewhere between sand and sky, between expectation and possibility, I had found not just love, but myself.